when talking about her great niece, Thelma Favell said, "Any good word there is out there in this world, that would describe Tina. To me, Tina was the perfect little girl." But after the tragic and brutal death of her father, Tina Fontaine changed. She began drifting away. She started using drugs and was suspended from school. Looking back, it was probably a desperate cry for help. At 1:30 p.m. on the 17th of August 2014, a body was found in the Red River. The body was wrapped in plastic and a duvet, and it had been weighed down with rocks. The following day, the body was identified as that of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine. A man would stand trial for Tina's death, but would she get justice? Tina's death seemed to ignite something in Canadian society, with many human rights groups calling for a full inquiry into the alarming number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the Student's Verdict podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. To our new listeners, hi, my name is Emily and I'm your host. If you haven't already, please go and listen to some of our earlier episodes, which include cases such as the disappearance of Marlene Oakes, the McMartin preschool abuse scandal, and Jack the Stripper. Please follow us on Instagram at the Student Verdict Pod and on Twitter at Student Verdict. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review. If you don't like us, then please keep your comments to yourself. As always, resources used in this episode will always be linked in the show notes. Our main sources for today's episode are Wikipedia and CBC News, but please check the show notes for a full list. A quick word of caution, this episode contains strong language and discusses the sexual exploitation of a minor. Listener discretion is therefore advised. With all of that said, let's jump into today's episode. Our story begins before Tina was even born. Tina's family had a difficult and quite tragic past. Her paternal grandfather was a residential schools survivor, and this harrowing experience affected him for the rest of his life, leading him to drink and violence. For those of you who may not know about residential schools, in Canada, the Indian residential school system was a network of board schools specifically for Indigenous people. This system was set up following the passage of the Indian Act in 1876. An amendment in this law made attendance at day schools, industrial schools, or residential schools compulsory for First Nations children. In a cruel and ironic twist, rather than guiding and encouraging children in their personal development, these residential schools sought to remove Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture, crushing their heritage in the process. They were disconnected from their families. They were forced to speak English or French, which deprived them of their ancestral languages. These residential schools lasted around 100 years, and during their existence, about 30% or 150,000 Indigenous children passed through their halls. Although the exact number is unknown, and this is staggering and heartbreaking, it's estimated that between 3,200 and 6,000 children died through school-related deaths. Many also experienced both physical and sexual abuse whilst at the residential schools. Perhaps the worst thing about these residential schools was that its students often graduated but found that they didn't really have a place in society anymore. They were still the victims of racism in mainstream Canadian society, but now they were also unable to integrate back into their own communities, leaving them on the fringes of society. When Tina's father, Eugene, was 12 years old, he left his home in Sangeen First Nation, which was about 70 miles northeast of Winnipeg, and he moved to Winnipeg. It was on the streets of Winnipeg that he first developed an addiction to alcohol. Tina's mother, Valentina Duck, was raised in Blood Vein First Nation, located approximately 160 miles north of Winnipeg. Valentina had a troubled upbringing. From the age of 6, she was removed from and returned to her mother by the Manitoba Child and Family Services, and this happened more than once. The Manitoba CFS reported that Valentina had experienced a number of significant traumas as a child, which were never properly addressed. She was permanently removed from the family when she was 10 years old. She was then placed in various foster homes where she was sexually abused. To deal with the abuse, she then turned to alcohol and drugs. This story takes a sinister turn when you discover that when Tina's parents met, her mother was a 12-year-old in care and her father was 23 years old. What's even more shocking is that there was evidence in the form of CFS records showing that they knew the couple's relationship was sexual. They also knew that Eugene had issues with addiction and had been violent in the past. Valentina was known to run away from her foster placements to be with Eugene. In the spring of 1996, Tina's mother gave birth to her first child. This child was immediately and permanently taken from her by Children and Family Services. Tina was the third child of Eugene and Valentina. Sadly, like the other children, when Tina was a year old, she was removed from her family's care for the first time by CFS. She was returned to her mother, but was removed again from the home when she was 2. She was then returned to the care of her father. Tina remained in her father's custody until she was 5 years old, when he, through a private guardianship arrangement, gave Tina and her younger sister Sarah to his aunt, Tina's great-aunt, Thelma Favell. Thelma loved Tina as if she were her own. When talking about her great-niece, Thelma described her as perfect. She said that Tina loved school and was a good student. She loved jumping on the trampoline and playing with the younger children whom she adored. Favell said that Tina had a big heart. Everything seemed to be working out for Tina Fontaine, despite her difficult upbringing. This family seemed like the stability that she desperately needed. That was until 2011. In 2011, when Tina was just 12 years old, her father Eugene was brutally beaten to death whilst he was battling cancer. 2 men were charged with manslaughter and were sentenced to 9 years in prison for the crime. Tina struggled not only with the tragic loss of her father, but with the court case that followed. Thelma recalled that when Tina sat down to write her victim impact statement, the young teen started to, quote, slowly drift away. Tina's experience at court was exacerbated when she overheard a conversation about the extent of her father's injuries. What's even more shocking is that following her father's death, Tina did not receive any kind of counselling, grief or otherwise. As we've said, following her father's death, Tina became increasingly absent from school. The standard of her schoolwork started slipping, and she often failed to turn in her assignments. She was suspended. She got involved in arguments and physical fights, which resulted in calls to the police. She was hospitalized for self-harm and was reported missing 3 times. All of these things are clearly desperate cries for help. After the death of Eugene, Tina felt compelled to connect with her biological mother, Valentina Duck. Thelma was concerned about her great-niece hanging around her mother, as Valentina had struggled with alcoholism and had a history of working in the sex trade, so she asked Tina's caseworkers what she should do. They advised that it was all right for Tina to spend time with her biological mother, and so Thelma let Tina and her sister Sarah visit Valentina. According to Thelma, the visit was good. This was now an incentive for Tina, so when her grades started to improve, Thelma promised that Tina could visit her mother at the end of June, provided she passed her exams. This time, Thelma didn't check on Valentina. Instead, she gave Tina $50 and a calling card before Tina left. She deeply regretted this, saying, quote, "I didn't find out till later she, Valentina, lost custody of her kids and she was back on the streets." When Tina failed to return home, Thelma voluntarily put Tina in the care of Manitoba Child and Family Services. Thelma held them responsible for failing to protect Tina. On the 31st of July 2014, Tina was reported missing to the Winnipeg Police Service. It was later found that Tina had been staying with her aunt Lana from the 1st to the 3rd of August. On the 5th of August, Tina made contact with her caseworker from Child and Family Services and was subsequently picked up by members of CFS and the Winnipeg Police. The timeline of Tina's movements is unclear between the 5th and 8th of August, but it is said that she remained a missing youth during this time, despite having been picked up. Tina attended a youth centre in the early morning hours of the 8th of August, but she left shortly after. At 5:15 a.m. the same day, 2 police officers stopped a truck with an allegedly drunk driver. In the truck was also Tina Fontaine. Despite the circumstances and the fact she was known to be missing, the police did not take Tina into their custody. When Thelma later learned of this, she said, quote, "Her name should have come up as a red flag, that she was a missing girl, and they just let her go." It should be noted these 2 constables were later suspended and eventually left the police force altogether. At 10 a.m. on the 8th of August 2014, Tina was found passed out in an alleyway near Ellis Avenue. She was taken to a hospital where she was treated before being checked into a hotel placement. She left the hotel shortly after. Now, putting Tina in a hotel might sound strange, but it was actually a fairly common practice which has since been phased out following reports of children experiencing physical and sexual abuse at these hotels. On the 9th of August, after Tina left the hotel, she was reported missing. At 1:30 p.m. on the 17th of August 2014, a body was found in the Red River, also known as the Red River of the North. This river is about 550 miles long, of which 395 miles are in the US and about 158 miles are in Canada. The body was found wrapped in plastic and a duvet and was weighed down with rocks. The next day, the body was identified as that of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine. An autopsy would be unable to conclusively determine the cause of her death, and unfortunately, the river had washed away any DNA evidence from her body and the duvet. A toxicologist reported that although she had marijuana and alcohol in her system, it was unlikely that these caused her death. Tina was buried on Zangeen First Nation next to her father, and a memorial was placed at the site on the first anniversary of the discovery of her body. As a result of Tina's death, the Canadian Human Rights Commission requested a full inquiry into the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. Many people described this as a genocide, with Chief Commissioner Marion Buller describing it as a, quote, "deliberate race, identity, and gender-based genocide." It was Raphael Lemkin who coined the term genocide. The term signifies a coordinated plan aimed at destroying the essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Canada's Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act says that genocide includes acts, but also omissions. So let's talk about some of the startling statistics. Between 1980 and 2012, Indigenous women and girls represented 16% of all female homicides in Canada, which doesn't sound bad until you consider that they only represent 4% of the female population. In a 2014 report, Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women, a National Operational Overview, it stated that over a 30-year period, more than 1,000 Indigenous women were murdered. A 2011 Statistics Canada report estimated that between 1997 and 2000, the rate of homicides for Aboriginal women and girls was almost 7 times higher than that of other females. In fact, compared to non-Indigenous women and girls, they were also disproportionately affected by all forms of violence. 1 in 3 Native women is sexually assaulted during her life, and 67% of these assaults are perpetrated by non-natives. Leslie Spillett, an Indigenous advocate, said that it was down to issues such as poverty and a lack of housing and resources that played a role in the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Tina's death seemed to spark something in the community. A volunteer group called Drag the Red began dragging parts of the Red River with hooks where Tina's body was found, in order to try and find evidence or possibly other bodies. One volunteer, Carl Kimach, whose sister went missing in November 2010, said, quote, "She, Tina, was so young. She was just a kid. Kids don't deserve that. Nobody does. Change needs to happen with society. Slowly, I think it's happening. Slowly." Kimach's sister was 20 and was from Sapatawayak Cree Nation. She disappeared from Winnipeg's William Avenue on the 10th of November 2010. When talking about Drag the Red, Kimach said, "We do the best we can. The police said they would never ever search the river. For me, I believe it needs to be done. The water holds a lot of secrets. It helps me to know that it is being searched. I wonder who is in here. Is she, his sister, there? Is she not there?" Another volunteer group, the Bear Clan Patrol, banded together as a response to Tina's death. The aim of the group was to patrol and protect the people in downtown Winnipeg. It had originally started in 1992. The group would keep an eye on vulnerable sex workers. They would intervene in physical confrontations, and they would get people under the influence of alcohol or drugs to a safe place. They went after Johns, so men who came into the area for sex. Interestingly, in Canada, it's illegal to buy sex, but not to sell it. Sadly, the Bear Clan Patrol initiative had disappeared over the years, but was reignited when Tina's body was found. James Favell, an organizer of the Bear Clan Patrol, said, quote, "There's been so much violence in the community. It's time to put a stop to it. This is what we're going to do, to stop it." The group patrolled for 3 hours at a time, 4 times a week. Another campaign was led by an Inuit woman, Holly Jarrett, who started a hashtag campaign, #AmINext, and a petition. Her aim was to create a space for Indigenous women to talk about their experiences. She hoped the campaign would lead to a national inquiry. In the fall of 2015, in a response to Tina's death, the Strong-Hearted Buffalo Women Crisis Stabilization Unit was established. The purpose of this unit was to intervene where Indigenous girls were at risk of sexual exploitation. Following Tina's death, funding was collected and a 24/7 safe space for young people was opened called Tina's Safe Haven. We're going to take a quick break here to share with you another one of our great podcasting friends, Mask of Sanity. Please show Melanie some love by listening and reviewing her incredible podcast.
Hey there, true crime friends. It's Melanie Peterson, the host of Mask of Sanity. Join me as I take you through the cases of some of the world's most notorious killers and the brave men and women who risked it all to capture them. You can find Mask of Sanity wherever you listen to podcasts and hear all about the calculated madness of some of the world's most brutal killers who hid behind the mask of sanity. You won't want to miss this. Until next time, stay safe, friends.
At the end of 2015, a 56-year-old man by the name of Raymond Cormier was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, to which he pleaded not guilty. But who was this man? Well, it was a tip from Cormier's friend that led police to his house on Carmen Avenue on the 1st of October. When he heard the police coming, Cormier tried to escape, but the officers were able to detain and arrest him. He would later tell the police he ran because he didn't want to go to jail. When questioned by authorities, Cormier initially told them that he had wanted to have sex with Tina when he first met her, but that was before he found out she was under 18. Cormier was initially cooperative with police. However, at one point in the interview, he told police not to focus on him because he didn't do it. He told police he didn't know she was 15, and that when he found out, he vowed not to have sex with her anymore. Yes, that contradicts what he initially said, which was that he wanted to have sex with her but didn't because he found out she was underage. He made a series of unusual and concerning statements when being interviewed by police, such as, and these are quotes, "Don't overdose here because then your body's going to be wrapped up in a carpet and thrown in the river." Another one was, "Have you ever been haunted by something? I know, I'm really moving into the realm of psychiatry, psychology." So Cormier spent time in prison for charges unrelated to Tina's death and was then released in June 2015, following which the police decided to launch an undercover investigation. Bring on Project Styx. Does anyone know where they get these names from? I've got no idea, but they're really weird. Anyway, as part of the investigation, officers recorded conversations that they had had with Cormier when they were undercover. They had hoped to gather enough evidence against him so they could charge him. They even went as far as to provide him with accommodation at 400 Logan Avenue, which they bugged with listening devices. From the recordings, it does seem like Cormier was preoccupied, almost obsessed with Tina's death, claiming to want to find the killer. Was this just morbid curiosity, his way of dealing with grief, or was it something a bit more sinister? What I want to do is talk about some of the comments he made in these recordings. In a recording from the 25th of September 2015, Cormier said, quote, "You ever been haunted by something? What happened there? Really fucking it's not right. Fuck, it's right on the shore. So what did I do? Threw her in." On another occasion, it's reported he said, quote, "I did Tina, fucking supposed to be legal and only 15. No going back too. The cops said if there would have been DNA, and then probably they would have had enough evidence to charge. You know that? For the murder of Tina Fontaine." To be clear, earlier in the transcript he said, quote, "I know that I got caught in a fucking situation. I never murdered anybody." In a recording from the 25th of October 2015, Cormier tells a woman, quote, "This is how we met, and then we had sex, and we, fuck, sure enough, fuck. Tina finds a knife, she got angry and blah, blah, blah." Cormier's trial began on the 29th of January 2018, more than 3 years after Tina's body was pulled from the Red River. The case was heard before the Court of Queen's Bench Chief Justice Glenn Joyal, and the jury was comprised of 8 women and 4 men. The Crown attorneys, James Ross and Brita Passler, believed that they knew why Cormier had killed Tina. It was their assertion that Cormier murdered Tina because he wanted to conceal the fact that he had had sex with a minor, fearing he would be considered a paedophile. However, the Crown had an uphill battle on their hands, as there was no formal cause of death. There was no physical evidence connecting Cormier to Tina's death, and there were no eyewitnesses. The Crown's case relied heavily on the secret recordings, which they said were admissions of guilt. Cormier's defense team argued that the Crown had simply cherry-picked statements from the transcripts, which obscured the context of the conversations. They also argued that the recordings were difficult to hear. So let's delve into the Crown's case. On the first day of the trial, Thelma was called as a witness. Thelma explained to the court how Tina and her sister ended up in her care. She also explained how much Tina struggled following the death of her father, telling the court, quote, "She didn't know how to function without her father." As Tina began to drift away from her great aunt and started spending more time with her mother Valentina, she was reported missing several times. It was hard to keep track of her because she went from hotel placements to sleeping on couches all over the city, only to leave shortly after. During this time, she met her boyfriend, Cody Mason. Mason from St. Teresa Point appeared in court as a witness for the Crown. He testified that he and Tina were drinking on the street one night in mid-July when Cormier started talking with them. He told the pair his name was Sebastian. Mason would later tell the court that Cormier provided him and Tina with drugs. The court was told how on the 6th of August, Cormier had made sexual advances towards Tina, who was underage at the time. She'd got angry that night because Cormier had sold her bike for drugs. She screamed at him, and as she stormed out of the house, she told him she was going to call the police about a stolen truck that was parked at Cormier's house. Sure enough, the Crown then played the 911 call that Tina placed to police. In it, she said, quote, "I'd like to report a blue truck that was stolen. He is my friend, and he stole it earlier today." The dispatcher told her to report the theft via an alternative telephone number. As I've said in a previous episode, there is always a police informant in these cases. In this case, it was a man by the name of Ernest DeWolf, an inmate from Milner Ridge Correctional Facility, who had contacted police on the 1st of October with information. DeWolf reportedly wanted nothing in return for his testimony. In court, he told the court that following Cormier's argument with Tina, Cormier assured him that the two had talked and were okay again. It was DeWolf who testified that he had seen the same duvet that Tina's body had been found in Cormier's house on Carmen Avenue. More witnesses also confirmed this. Ida Beardy and her daughter Chantel testified that they too had seen the same duvet cover in Cormier's possession. They testified that Cormier, or Frenchie as they knew him, had lived in a tent in the back garden of their two-story house on Alexander Avenue. It was Ida Beardy who directed D.S. Stalker to a scrapyard during the course of the investigation, where he was able to obtain a photo of Raymond Cormier. Ida then confirmed that that was indeed Frenchie in the photograph. The problem with the duvet was that 800 of the Chloe green leaf pattern duvets were sold at Costco across 3 different stores in Winnipeg. When the police questioned the purchasers, it was reported that around 100 people were cooperative with the investigators. However, a number of purchasers had gotten rid of their duvets or donated them. When detectives showed Ida and Chantel the photo of the duvet Tina's body had been found in, they both immediately recognized it as belonging to Frenchie. I should make it clear that the officers purposefully showed the pair the photo at different times to make sure that their individual expressions were honest and to ensure privacy. Both were confident the blanket belonged to Cormier. The defense questioned whether Beardy's accounts were valid because officers admitted that they already knew the detectives were working on the Fontaine case. Another witness was Carol Traverse, who worked at a youth resource center, a 16-bed temporary shelter for women and girls in Winnipeg's North End. Traverse testified that Tina, who was 15 at the time she died, looked even younger than her age. When she attended the resource center for a week during the summer of 2014, Tina had her picture taken. Traverse recalled that at this time she looked very skinny, which made her look very young. According to pathologist Dennis Ree, Tina weighed only 72 pounds or 33 kilograms when she was pulled from the Red River. Other witnesses in court included Tina Fontaine, Tina's aunt, who testified that her niece had stayed with her at her apartment on Furby Street for 2 nights during the first weekend of August. She also testified that Tina came by her flat a few nights later and had asked to borrow a jumper from her auntie because she was cold. They hugged and then Tina left. Lana cried in court when she recalled that this was the last time she saw her niece, saying, quote, "She was happy, always a bright smile. Last time I saw her, she was my baby." Another aunt of Tina's, Angie Duck, Valentina's sister, told the court that Tina had visited her home too in the weeks before she died. She recalled that she had met Cody Mason on a few occasions when he came with Tina to her home. Angie told the court that Tina often came to her house to try and contact her mother. Communication was difficult as Tina didn't have a mobile phone, so Angie would phone Valentina, who would then come and pick her daughter up. Angie recalled that the last time she saw Tina was on the 22nd of July. Tina walked past her house, all dressed up in nice clothing. The court also heard from witness Joseph Nanakawap, who was, at one point, the boyfriend of Valentina Duck, Tina's biological mother. Through an interpreter, Joseph told the court that he had seen Tina a handful of times during the summer that she died, and that he sometimes fed her and she would sleep on his couch. Joseph told the court that he had met Tina's boyfriend, Cody Mason, on a few occasions. He also told the court that neither Tina nor Cody ever appeared drunk or high on drugs. Joseph recalled that he last saw Tina a week before the police first attended his address, when they were trying to find Tina, who had been reported missing. Another witness was Stephen Whitehurst, a longtime friend of Eugene Fontaine, Tina's father. He told the court that he had known Tina since she was a baby. Tina would sometimes come to his house, either on her own or with Cody. In the summer of 2014, he estimated she came to his house 3 or 4 times. He recalled that the last time he saw Tina was on the 28th of July, when he and his wife were driving to Fort Alexander on Sanguine First Nation. Tina asked him for a ride, but she was too late. Stephen had already left. From all these witnesses, I can understand why it was so difficult to keep track of Tina. She seemed to constantly be on the move, going from one house to another, staying on a couch here and in a shelter there. Family members reported that Tina would sometimes be dressed inappropriately for the weather and would be cold. Others said she was carrying a box of belongings. To me, all of these are warning signs that this young girl was living quite a transient life and that she wasn't really settled. A fingerprint analyst, Constable Garrett Carrot, that's Garrett Carrot, not spelt carrot like the vegetable, Carrette, but still Garrett Carrot. That's possibly the best name I've ever heard, but anyway. He told the court that on the 18th of September 2014, he had been asked to examine a stolen truck. This was the same truck that Tina had reported stolen to police in the 911 call, and it was recovered 43 days after she placed that call. Carrot was told that Tina had allegedly been in the truck at one time. Carrot told the court that it looked like the vehicle had been wiped down, but that he was able to lift 3 fingerprints. He confirmed that none of the prints matched Tina Fontaine or Raymond Cormier. A palm print was also found in the vehicle, but as they didn't have a sample of Tina's palm prints, the two couldn't be compared. Another 2 witnesses called by the Crown were the 2 Winnipeg detectives, Detective Sergeant Jeff Stalker and Detective Sergeant Miles Riddle, who had been tasked with investigating Tina's death. When questioned by Cormier's defense attorney, Tony Kavanagh, DS Stalker told the court that the investigation had been extensive and included a huge canvassing effort to track down the owner of the duvet cover. He went on to inform the court that Sergeant John O'Donovan alone had interviewed between 40 and 60 people regarding Tina's death, saying, quote, "That's way above the normal for any investigation I've ever been involved in. We left no stone unturned and chased down every lead." It was Stalker who responded to Tina's 911 call about the stolen truck at Cormier's address. The call brought Stalker to a halfway house for ex-inmates on the 20th of August 2014. The recording of Tina's call was played in court, causing her great-aunt Thelma to burst into tears. In the recording, Tina said that the truck was taken by someone called Sebastian, one of Cormier's aliases. When Stalker asked around about a Sebastian, he was directed to a house on Alexander Avenue. It was said that the man known as Sebastian was living in a tent in a garden. The house belonged to Ida Beardy, who gave permission for police to seize the tent Cormier had been staying in. In court, Stalker read out the notes he had taken from his initial meeting with DeWolf, the jailhouse informant. Stalker recalled that when DeWolf was shown a photo of the duvet that Tina's body had been wrapped up in, he said, quote, "That looks like Ray's blanket. I can't say 100% that's the one, but it looks like it." The next witness we're going to talk about is Glenn MacDonald, a 50-year-old renovator who also dealt drugs, which was how he came to know the defendant, Raymond Cormier, when he started selling Cormier crystal meth. They had a weird deal where MacDonald would sometimes accept tools in exchange for drugs. The court was told that the pair would see each other almost every day. MacDonald testified that there was a 4-door truck parked at Cormier's address during an evening in August 2014. MacDonald soon learned that this truck was stolen. MacDonald recalled that Cormier used it to transport tools but was looking to get rid of the vehicle. This was the last time MacDonald saw the truck. He continued to sell drugs to Raymond Cormier. Crime analyst David Bowman was the next witness. He told the court that 12 vehicles were stolen on or around the 6th of August. These vehicles included 2 trucks, a black GMC Sierra and a blue Ford F-150. Witness Donald Schneider told the court that his blue Ford F-150 was stolen on the 6th of August 2014. He admitted that he had left the vehicle unlocked when he was doing some landscaping work. When he returned to the vehicle 5 to 10 minutes later, it was gone. The vehicle didn't turn up again until the 17th of September 2014, when a PC found the blue Ford truck with a smashed driver's side window, and there was blood on the shards of glass. Schneider noted a lot of differences between his truck and the truck he saw before him. The mirrors were smashed, there were strange patterns on the seats, and it looked like the vehicle had been thoroughly cleaned. With the seemingly endless list of Crown witnesses and the secret recordings, it was clear that the Crown were working hard, despite their adversities, to prove to the jury that Raymond Cormier was indeed guilty. We have to bear in mind that the burden of proof rests with the prosecution, meaning that the prosecution must prove guilt. It is not for the defense to prove innocence. With this in mind, in the nearly 3-week trial, the defense did not present a single shred of evidence. The defense criticized a number of aspects of the Crown's case. So, firstly, they criticized the fact that the evidence was circumstantial, with no forensic or eyewitness evidence to directly connect their client, Raymond Cormier, to Tina's death. Which leads me to their second criticism, that no cause of death was ever established by the medical examiner. The defense argued that the Crown's case was built on inferences from the recordings. They said that the memories of the various witnesses, specifically the witnesses who claimed to have seen Cormier with the same duvet that Tina's body was wrapped up in, were inaccurate, suggesting to the jury that there were other potential suspects who could have been responsible for Tina's death. Bearing in mind that the threshold in the criminal courts is beyond all reasonable doubt, what verdict would you have delivered? Here are some of my thoughts. So, the fact there's no cause of death, how, from the defense point of view, they're going to say, well, how can the Crown definitively say she was murdered and by whom if they cannot point to how she died? You've got no DNA so you can't say if she was sexually assaulted or anything. There's no DNA on the duvet either. Witnesses can say that Raymond Cormier knew her, but can't place them together on the night in question. The only thing I would say is the Crown's motive does sound plausible, and you have got these weird recordings, but is it enough to prove beyond all reasonable doubt? In a CBC News article from the 22nd of February 2018, it was reported that Raymond Cormier stared straight ahead as the verdict was read out. After it was delivered, there were tears and gasps as the words "not guilty" hung in the air of the packed courtroom. Tina's family was shocked and horrified. Her mother Valentina swore as she left the courtroom, saying, quote, "Fuck you if you think you can get away with this." Whilst Thelma Favell just kept crying, saying, "My baby," over and over. Grand Chief Sheila North said, quote, "We've all failed her. We as a nation need to do better." Grand Chief North was just one of the indigenous leaders in Manitoba who criticised the systems that failed Tina Fontaine. On the steps of the courtroom, Grand Chief North continued, quote, "It was a tremendously sad day for our people. This is not the outcome anybody wanted. The systems, everything that was involved in Tina's life, failed her. We've all failed her. We as a nation need to do better for our young people. It might not be this accused person that took her life, but someone took her life. That fact remains, and we must get to the bottom of it." It was reported that the jury had deliberated for around 13 hours before delivering their verdict, with their verdict leaving many grief-stricken. When she heard the verdict, the Federal Crown Indigenous Relations Minister, Carolyn Bennett, tweeted the following, quote, "My thoughts are with Tina Fontaine's family. Tina's is a tragic story that demonstrates the failures of all the systems for Indigenous children and youth on every level. We need to do better. We need to fix this." But did they fix it? Did anything actually change? When speaking to a reporter from CBC News, Tina's cousin, Rose Fontaine, said she was afraid of being taken. This was 1 year after Tina's death, and this young woman was still scared, suggesting that enough still hadn't been done to protect young Indigenous women. In fact, Rose said she believed that the streets had gotten worse in the year since Tina's death. This article, which I've linked in the show notes, was really important for me to share because it shows the devastation a loss like Tina's can cause for a family. Rose and her sister Katie Fontaine recalled how, quote, "Some family went to drugs. Some family just stopped talking to each other. Just seems like everybody is growing apart." Katie, the elder of the two sisters, told the reporter that she was worried about her younger sisters going out at night. The sisters were happy that the Bear Clan had banded together and were patrolling the streets again, but they knew that the Bear Clan couldn't be everywhere, protecting everyone at the same time. Rose told the reporter that she herself had been approached by men looking for sex. She is just 15 years old. Rose recalled, quote, "I went to go see my friend. I was taking a shortcut and a guy was asking to take me somewhere. I said no and kept backing up slowly. We were talking for like 5 minutes. I tried to walk away and he tried to grab me by my leather jacket. I ran away and he stopped me again and said, 'I have money.' I said, 'I don't care about your money.'" Tina's case led the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs to create the First Nations Family Advocate Office, which is headed by Cora Morgan. 5 years after Tina's death, Morgan told CBC News that she feared another Tina would be found because nothing in society had changed as they had hoped it would. She said that the issues had only worsened, as confirmed by the accounts of Rosie and Katie Fontaine. I think Tina's case was tragic because it seemed like she fell through the cracks. Each time she should have been saved, she was unfortunately let down one way or another. Morgan says that these gaps have only widened since Tina's death. Morgan says that child poverty is rife, with the number of people reported missing forever increasing year after year. After Tina's death, recommendations were made to improve areas including justice, education, mental health, and child welfare. It was reported that investments had been made to try and improve addiction and mental health services and sexual exploitation responses. However, all of these things are clearly not enough. In an interview with CBC News from March 2019, Raymond Cormier denied sexually exploiting and killing Tina Fontaine, but admitted that he did provide her with cannabis. He seemed to justify his acts by saying that it was only cannabis he supplied her with, and not a harder drug. He expressly denied any involvement with Tina's death, saying, quote, "I was the one who had the most convenient background. My history, the 92 convictions, in and out of jail, homeless, they handpicked me. There are people out there who might think that I got away with something. I didn't get away with nothing." It should be noted that according to a report by the Children's Advocate, Tina had tested positive for amphetamines. She had denied using the drug with Cormier, although his name was mentioned in the report. According to the report, 70% of youth who were exploited in Manitoba were indigenous, and 80% of those were victims. Thelma Favell demanded that Raymond Cormier be charged with supplying Tina with drugs. It seems as though she wanted him held responsible for what happened to Tina in any way. She didn't want to think that he had got away scot-free. Grand Chief North agreed, saying, quote, "He should face charges for it, for supplying drugs to a minor. The danger he put Tina in, he should face some time for that." So here's the problem, and it's the same in the UK. If you are charged with a crime you committed in 1980, for example, the relevant case law will be the law that was in force at the time you committed the crime. Applying that to this case, federal prosecutor Robin Parker said that any charges now laid against Raymond Cormier would be under the law that applied in 2014 when the crime was committed. This would be before the Cannabis Act came into effect. The Cannabis Act made it a crime to supply minors with cannabis. Parker went on to say that they could possibly charge Cormier with trafficking marijuana, but that it would be hard to prove. The Crown also has to weigh up whether any prosecution they are intending to pursue is in the public interest. Parker told reporters that of the two possible crimes that Raymond Cormier could have been charged with, of course they pursued the more serious second-degree murder charge as opposed to the drug charge. Interestingly, according to the CBC News article, at the time of Fontaine's death in 2014, supplying her with drugs was an aggravating factor in her case, which may have caused the judge to increase Cormier's prison time when sentencing, had he been found guilty. But, under today's law, he could have been given a 14-year prison sentence. A member of staff at Winnipeg's Street Reach program, Jennifer Richardson, told reporters that drugs were often used to exploit young and possibly vulnerable people in society. Quote, "In my experience, oftentimes adult males are luring children through the auspices of come to a party, but their intent is to sexually exploit them. They offer a great time. They offer drugs and alcohol. They offer a place to stay. They offer understanding. They offer love. But their intent, from cases I've investigated, is to exploit children, is to have sex with children." During the trial, the secret recordings were played to Cormier, where he seems to suggest a sexual relationship with Tina. Cormier said that there were words missing and that the Crown had cherry-picked the dialogue. It was reported at this time that police were still investigating the death of Tina Fontaine after Raymond Cormier was found not guilty. Police say that it is not a cold case, nor will it be classified as such in the foreseeable future. Before this episode ends, I want to finish by continuing the conversation regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. I think I owe it to Tina. To be clear, a lot of the facts I'm about to discuss are taken from Wikipedia. So, one of the biggest overall issues was that Canada did not maintain a database for missing people until 2010. Yes, 2010. This posed a problem when it came to tracking and monitoring the rate at which Indigenous people were reported missing and murdered. In a report from June 2019, it was stated that there was no reliable estimate of the numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and individuals who were two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and aromantic in Canada. According to a 2007 study by the province of Saskatchewan, Indigenous women made up 6% of the population in that province, but made up a staggering 60% of the missing persons cases. One of the most important reports is entitled Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women, a National Operational Overview, which was released in May 2014 and went right back to 1951. I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but I will link the page in the show notes for you to look at. One of the most crucial findings concerned the 2014 and 2015 Royal Canadian Mounted Police reports, which identified incomplete causes of homicides of Indigenous women and girls in Canada, which we saw in the case of Tina Fontaine. Another thing which really shocked me was that there was a statistic that Indigenous men were responsible for 70% of the murders of Indigenous women and girls. This is simply not true. There is no factual basis for this. According to a CBC News article from the 16th of February 2016, Canada's Minister for the Status of Women, Patty Hajdu, said that it was estimated that the number of Indigenous women and girls who had gone missing or who had been murdered in Canada since the 70s was unclear, but could be as high as 4,000. This was based on a report by the Native Women's Association of Canada and data collected by the Walk for Justice initiative. The RCMP estimated much lower numbers, namely 1,000. It was reported that Walk for Justice began collecting the names of Indigenous women who had been murdered and who were missing, but they stopped counting when they got to 4,232. I'm sad to say that, unfortunately, there seemed to be a history of underreporting by law enforcement of cases of murdered and missing Indigenous women. It was said that thousands of such cases were not properly investigated due to police bias. For example, the 49 victims of killer Robert Pickton. The last thing I want to talk about is the final report from the 3rd of June 2019. Marion Buller, the inquiry's chief commissioner, said that the high level of violence against Indigenous women and girls was, quote, caused by state actions and inactions rooted in colonialism and colonial ideologies. To prepare for the report, CBC News reported that the Commission held numerous gatherings, including 24 hearings across Canada. The Commission collected statements from 750 people. They held visits in 8 correctional facilities. They led 4 guided dialogues and held 8 validations. During 15 community hearings, it was said that 2,380 people participated, including family members and survivors of violence who shared their stories. 84 expert witnesses, elders and knowledge keepers, frontline workers and officials were also consulted for the report. The findings of the report were shocking. We've talked about some of the findings already, but it was clear from this report that Indigenous communities were under-prioritized and under-resourced, which meant that more individuals could slip through the cracks, just as Tina did. To quote from the report, deaths and disappearances of Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLGBTQIA people are marked by indifference, specifically prejudice, stereotypes, and inaccurate beliefs and attitudes about Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA persons negatively influence police investigations, and therefore deaths and disappearances are investigated and treated differently from other cases. I'm going to end by just talking about some of the calls for reforms. So these include acknowledging the rights of Indigenous peoples in terms of their culture as an inherent right, recognizing Indigenous languages as official languages and creating educational opportunities that incorporate Indigenous language, educating the general public and those within social services about anti-racism and anti-sexism, and implement social movements based on confronting stereotypes. Supporting the increase in representation of Indigenous peoples in the media, providing financial support of resources and specialised care provided by the government to family or community members of missing children and murdered Indigenous women. Child welfare services, ensuring a family member or close friend will care for Indigenous children. The new caregivers will then receive financial support equal to the amount of a foster family. Reading and understanding the final report itself and acknowledge the land lived upon, allowing for Indigenous girls and women to generate their individual self-determined solutions. And that is the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. The Student's Verdict is a bi-weekly podcast, so follow us on social media to hear about our next episode. The Student's Verdict can be found anywhere you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, Spreaker, and iHeartRadio. While you're there, why not check out Mask of Sanity podcast? Next week's episode is going to be really, really special. You aren't going to want to miss it. See you on the next one, and remember to keep living the dream.